Welcome to a Season of Caring podcast, where there's hope for living, loving, and caring with no regrets. This is Rayna Neises, your host, and today I'd like to introduce you to a wonderful friend of mine, Kinsey Oglesby. Hi, Kinsey. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Rayna. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you here today. So let me tell you a little bit about Kinsey. The last thing she ever expected was to care for her mother. She had many painful memories of her childhood where her mother was verbally abusive and cruel. But after her father died, she knew that her mother was showing signs of dementia and would soon be unable to care for herself. In due time, Kinsey moved her mother into her home and cared for her 5 years before she passed away. These 5 years taught her so many surprising lessons. Kinsey is a soul care coach, a writer, a speaker. She has a passion to help Christian women strengthen their relationship with God and find inner healing in the places of soul wounding or trauma. This takes place in one-on-one coaching sessions or online group settings and workshops. She writes stories of her own personal journey with God, which can be found at her blog at coachkinsey.com. And she stays active and has run several half marathons and sprint triathlons. Kinsey is insightful, humorous, loving, and generous, and she is quick to offer a hug to anybody who will receive it. Kinsey, I'm so excited for our listeners to have an opportunity to share your story, because so many times your story, unlike my story, I had a good relationship with my parents.
Right.
And so for me to step into a caregiving role was not easy, but way easier than having a tough relationship like you had with your mom.
Right.
So share with us a little bit about how you became her caregiver, how you moved into that role.
Yes, thank you, Rayna. It was actually interesting. After my dad died, I moved down to where she lived, which was basically about 10, 12 hours from where we were in North Carolina. But I wanted to live close to her to see, how she was handling things. And what we discovered is that these telephone scam artists were just taking her money right and left. And she was just sending them everybody money. And so we were trying to put a stop to that. We went and talked to the banker actually and just said, listen, this is what's happening. So if she comes in here wanting to wire some big money or something, please let us know. And they're like, we can't stop her from doing any transactions. And we were just hoping they would call us. And certainly they did one day. They said she's trying to wire $30,000 to a relative in Canada. We have no relatives in Canada. And my sister and I jumped in the car immediately, went to the bank, and we finally did get our name on her account and transferred the money to another account. And they held her at the bank like, we need you to wait a minute. It's going to take a while. And then they said, you don't have sufficient funds. They were waiting for it. We did all that within an hour. And so we were able to stop it. But we knew that she was just unable. So we actually put her in a retirement home for maybe 1 or 2 years, I think, because in our home, there's not really anything to do, but there they had activities and chapel, and they'd go on little field trips and all that stuff. But the last 6 months she was living there, she began to get real confused about where the dining room was, and she wasn't participating in any of the events. And we thought, well, if she's just going to sit there on her sofa, then we're going to bring her to our home, because we just couldn't leave her there like that, And she was ready to move into the assisted part. It was hard. Yeah, it was hard. It was really hard to get a diagnosis. We told several people she has dementia, and they would ask her questions like, no, she's okay. I'm like, well, you're not even asking us to verify if the information she's giving you is correct. So it was really hard to get her diagnosed, but yeah, it was really bad. But it's frustrating and maddening what people do to the elderly.
It is. We experienced that with my dad as well, through the mail more than, I guess he did have phone calls as well. And they would, as we'd look in his checkbook, he would send not large sums like you were talking about, but small amounts that added up to hundreds of dollars every month. And once they knew that he would send something, they would send 2 and 3 requests a month, and he would be sending money to the same group. And like you, it's just, you're totally powerless to help them because they just don't realize what they're doing, and no one is helping. I don't understand that.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Very frustrating.
Yeah, but that was where our big clue came in.
And then trying to get help on the medical end was challenging.
It was very challenging. Very challenging.
Eventually you did get a diagnosis, or?
Yeah, and we had a scan, but they still weren't, because it wasn't They didn't say it was Alzheimer's, and she had shrinkage in her brain and all. But I mean, basically, the signs were just all around us. I mean, but then when she couldn't find her way anymore to the dining room and was confused about where she was, then we knew. So she was still mobile, and she has what's called Lewy Parkinson's, dementia Parkinson's, something like that. I can't remember.
Lewy bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So she had a lot of tremors, was difficulty holding anything to drink or even feeding herself, and that type of stuff just continued, progressively got worse. And so she needed a lot of assistance then, but she was still mobile, but very confused. And that's probably the hardest part for caregivers. When they become bedridden, it's much, much easier to take care of them. When they're mobile, it's like a toddler. You got to watch them all the time.
You never know where they're going to go or what idea is going to strike that they're just going to try to go somewhere, just leave.
Right.
Yeah,
right. She did slip out one day and fell in the garage and broke her wrist. But, we've installed nanny cams into different rooms and stuff. But the journey with her, what's really stands out and significant, Rayna, is that my mom and I did not have a good relationship, as you read in the introduction. And I dreaded the thought that my dad might die before mom and that we would have to take care of her. I never thought it would be bad to take care of my dad. But she was a very cruel, unkind woman to us growing up. Now, things changed after I became an adult, and I certainly forgave her and all, but I was still not close to her. Mm-hmm. There was no emotional intimacy between us at all. So when she came into the home and as she progressed, where she became incontinent and we had to put her in diapers. I mean, all of these things were like gigantic bridges, because the thing is mom and I didn't touch. Mm-hmm. I don't remember ever being hugged or held by her or anything. Mm-hmm. And so I'm having to touch her body. I'm having to bathe her. The first day that I had to give her a shower, I was a nervous wreck. But she still had enough of her mental faculties to know that was embarrassing, and she didn't want my help. Mm-hmm. And I remember calling my sister. I said, I feel like I'm going to throw up. I don't think I can do this. And I just drugged my heels all day and finally did it. Once we crossed the bridge, it was a lot easier. She didn't like it, but I did it in as dignified way as I possibly could. And but each step, we kept progressing to different levels of touch. And that was probably the hardest thing, was just touching her body, because that's an intimate thing. Mm-hmm. And especially when you start doing diapers and bathing them and that kind of stuff. And then as it progresses, it gets even worse. You're doing things that nurses do. And it's a big barrier that you have to walk through. But what God did is he started bringing a lot of healing to me in that process. Because when you're taking care of somebody like that, you get a certain kind of connection. There's probably a word for it. I don't know what it is. In the psychological field, there's probably a word for that. There is a sort of connection that builds. There's a bonding over the caregiving. Mm-hmm. I guess it would happen with anybody, because you're responsible for them. And so I tried to treat her with, as much dignity and respect as I possibly could. So that kind of built a bridge. It started building a bridge between my heart to her. Started softening towards her, because it's a very sad thing to watch somebody slowly die, to lose their brain, and then the fear that was in her eyes and the confusion. That's even worse, because you don't want them to be afraid, and you want them to feel safe and secure, and it's painful to watch. I can't even imagine how painful it is if you have so many fond memories with that person. But even not having that, it was painful to watch her. And I pray that God would just take her, because that existence is just, there's no quality of life at all. But God used it. And, I am a Christian, and I have a deep faith, and I talk to God routinely about whatever's going on in my life. And I would talk to him about my mother. And one day, I feel like he said to me, and I journal all this down. I actually have this written down. He says, "Thank you so much for taking care of Barbara." Barbara was her name, and her nickname was Bobby. That was the nickname her mother had given her. "Thank you for taking care of her. She's my Bobby." That's what he said to me. "She's my Bobby. And you're my arms and eyes, hands and feet for her right now. And she's my princess. And I love how you're taking care of her. And I just want you to know that, let her know how much I love her." God's telling me this. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, it really set me back reeling, because what happened then is he expanded my perception of this woman. He added value to her that was supernatural. This is her God-given identity to me too. To me, Kinsey, she is a precious, precious soul. And so what happened is that something snapped in me, and I realized at this point, up until this point, I had been very dutiful, very honoring, very loving and kind to my mother. But this took to a whole nother level. This took it to a restoration level. Because that next morning when I went into her room, I put kisses all over her face.
Oh, wow.
And I said, Jesus wants me to let you know how much he loves you. And you're his precious daughter. And from that point on, I didn't just take care of her. I loved her. You know what I'm saying? And I would kiss her all the time. And that was just like, if you just knew, you know, how we weren't touchers, and to go to that extreme of kissing her. And that is the beauty of what God can do in a soul. And he just elevated her to see her like he sees her, and that I could step in for him and give her those last days of love and just kind of usher her into his arms when he was ready to call her home was just beautiful. So it went from dutiful relating to holy relating and restoration.
So amazing to have that opportunity to hear God and let him heal and bring that perspective. Caregiving is so difficult. And as you hire people to help, you can kind of see the heart of the dutiful versus the ones who do it in love. And when I think of those who did it in love, the grief that they experienced when we lost my dad was on a whole different level than those who just did the dutiful job. And that's such a great way of seeing, really being able to see into what the difference is, because we had many people over the years helping us care for my dad, and there was a big difference. But that's beautiful to see that.
Yeah, it's good that you point that out, because we had some caregivers that we hired to come in, and also hospice came in, of course, the last couple of years, and there was definitely a difference. And we had some really good help. The one caregiver that we hired, she was there when my mom died, and she just broke down in sobs, you know, because she called her baby. That's my baby.
And your mom didn't have a relationship by that point, you know, to be able to give into the relationship. So it really was just an outpouring of love.
It was. So,
So definitely the journey of moving from meeting those physical needs to learning to express the love of God for her was a beautiful journey, and what a blessing. So what other lessons would you say you experienced through that journey of caring for your mom?
So that was more of the soul lesson, but you know, there's just a lot of practical things you learn. One of the things is like, it is so expensive to take care of the elderly. It's so expensive to take care of them. And thankfully, my mom had a lot of money. We were able to do it. But, you know, if we had had that burden on us, I don't know how well we had done it. So, you know, it might have made it a lot more difficult. And that's where a lot of people are. They don't have the funds to take care of the parents. But so I learned, one is make sure that I have enough for my children to take care of me, because that would be a huge burden. But also, not just that, but buying them the best of things. Hospice would bring you diapers, and you know that you'd have to change them every hour because they're the cheapest diapers in the world. And I mean, I found these things on Amazon that hold 52 ounces. I'm like, we're putting those things on her. I don't care if they cost $10 a piece. We're putting those things on her at night so we can get some sleep and not have to keep getting up in the middle of the night. The money to buy the good things, the electrical bed we got it off of Craigslist. Listen, for anybody that's taking care of a bedridden patient, they need one of those electric beds, not the crank kind, but I got it for $400 on Craigslist. It was heavy. As I had to, you know, get people to bring it in the house, but it was the best investment we made. And then I turned around and sold it after she died for the same amount I paid for it. So they're very expensive beds. They run $2,000 to $3,000, but you look for them. They're good. Highly recommend that for people who are in caregiving. Just know that it will cost, but also you just have to call in Calvary. You really do have to get help. You cannot do it on your own. It's just, it's too much for any one person because it's emotionally draining. It's hard. You can't leave the house. You're housebound. But I was fortunate enough to have my husband who worked from home. And so his office was in the home. And so we came up with schedules and we took turns feeding her and changing her diaper and stuff. He was a saint. I mean, he is such a hero, the way he came in and helped me with my mom for all those years. It was just great. And so you have to find help. If you can't afford it, you find people who can come in and help you, because if you don't, it will take you under.
So wise. So lesson wise, just to kind of recap there, financially, it is a big burden in that way if you don't plan. So I, as well, walking that journey with both parents, it's important for me to have money set aside for my care, because no matter if I have dementia or disease like that, or if there's it's the last years of our life are the most expensive. So we have to plan for it. And having financial resources gives us more options.
It
and
really
that's
does.
just the truth.
It does.
Having the tools that you need, invest. Find a way to invest in what you need. I agree. There are so many great things out there. You have to find them, but you can get them used, because I know that was even a process once we lost my dad, trying to then pass on these things that we had. It was kind of a process to find somebody who wanted those or was able to take those. And then just call in the Calvary. I love that, because we talk about it all the time on the podcast. You cannot do this alone. And there are people who love you and will love the person that you're caring for.
Right.
Find them, ask. It seems like it's a lot harder to do than it is when you learn to ask, and just invite. That's kind of the way I always say it is. Invite someone to be a part of this. And if they say no, that's okay. But keep inviting.
Yes, very much so. And it gives them the opportunity to grow and serve. I mean, people do want to. They want to help. And when we don't ask for help, we're denying them an opportunity to use their gifts and their strengths and just the blessing of blessing you.
And being the hands and feet of Jesus.
That's right. Being the hands and feet of Jesus. It's so beautiful. I have a high, high respect for people that are in that business, people that work for, I love hospice. They were amazing. I tell you, it felt like I had a safety net, because there were so many things going on. One day her stomach was so swollen, it looked like she was 9 months pregnant. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I had them to call.
Right.
And say, here and there, oh yeah, her colon's twisted. They came in and did an x-ray in my home. They had these portal, and who knew? But I wouldn't have known what to do without them. So they were just great. And I didn't know she was ready for hospice. And somebody in my church said, you might want to just give them a call. Because I didn't think she was sick enough for it, and was ready for it. And they usually it's like for the last 6 months of life, but I think we had them for a year and a half at least. Because she just took forever to go on. Yeah,
it's one of those things that there's a qualification, and it doesn't hurt to ask. They're going to come in and evaluate and decide whether or not they qualify, and so it doesn't hurt for them to come out and do that, even if your answer is no, not yet. At least you have that relationship started, and And
not only that, they have resources that they can share with you if she doesn't qualify. So that's really helpful, because they know all about it. That's what they do.
Yes.
And we don't have a clue. It's the first time we're experiencing this.
Exactly.
But having them felt like such a safety net, like we're on a tightrope and down there's a net. So we're good.
That's amazing. And I would also encourage listeners, if that's not your experience with your hospice team, find a different team.
Right. See, I didn't even know you could shop around for them either, but you can, because there's all kinds of hospice chapters, or whatever you call them, branches.
Yes. There are so many different ones available, and who the team is definitely makes a difference. Sometimes you connect, sometimes you don't. So finding that support for you is a huge piece of it. So we're wrapping up here as we get to the end. Do you have any specific tips that you would like to share with our caregivers?
I guess because of the way my story turned out and the healing aspect of it is just go to Jesus. Let him show you how to move forward with whoever you're having to give care for, because he will. And he's there, and just knowing that he's there supporting you as well. And it's a beautiful thing to give dignity to a dying person. I think our culture does not respect the elderly generation enough. I don't think that they are treated with the honor and respect and dignity that they deserve. And so we have an opportunity to enter into that space with God, because all human life matters, right? Especially the elderly. And so it's a beautiful place to enter in with God to care for people he treasures.
And being able to transform that relationship that you had with your mom and make it where these difficult last years, there was so much required of you, also is a sweet memory and a beautiful healing.
It's so sweet, Rayna. I thought I was able to give to her everything she could not give to me. But she's healed now. She's completely healed and whole. So it's going to be good and interesting to see her in that way.
It will be. That will be such a blessing to have a whole different relationship when she's able to give back and not just receive.
Right. Yeah. I have a story I wrote about her. It's called Kisses for Bobby. It's on my blog post if people want to go. It's a sweet story. People can go and read about that.
That would be great. Definitely check out Kinsey's website at coachkinsey.com. And thank you so much, Kinsey, for the time today and just helping us see a little different perspective from that deeply wounded relationship to a beautifully restored relationship. And these caregiving years are full of a lot of struggle and pain, and more than we even imagine as we're starting on the journey. But thankfully, I, as a person of faith as well, have experienced that the Lord's strength and love through us can do all things. And so thankfully you can experience that as well, listeners, if you haven't. So thank you for joining us today, Kinsey.
Thank you, Rayna. I appreciate the opportunity.
And listeners, remember, again, you can find out more about working with Kinsey as a soul care coach at her website, coachkinsey.com. Thanks again for joining us today, listeners. Just a reminder, a Season of Caring podcast is created for the encouragement of family caregivers. If you have medical, financial, or legal questions, please contact your local professionals and take heart in your season of caring.